This is The Strange Recital, a podcast about fiction which questions the nature of reality.
Slanch. Neal Bacon burped softly as he licked the foam from his mustache. He nodded at the barkeep, then replied, "Yourself." His next sip slid down nice and easy. Tonight, he'd hoped there'd be no distractions. Looking around the cluttered room, he saw nothing to worry about, at least not yet. It was early. College crowd wouldn't arrive till later on, long after Raynal. Neal wasn't a hothead. He kept an eye on everything all right, but he didn't go sticking his nose into other people's business. He just knew how to get even when it was needed. It would be the last chance he'd get now that the new job had come in. "Neal?" He swiveled his head around. Joey was gliding up to the bar at the far end, where his usual stool waited. Neal nodded quickly, noticing how red Joey's eyes were already. "Hey Joey, how's your day been?" Same old, came the reply. Joey ordered an Abita and a shot of Jameson's. After a sip of beer, he knocked back the shot, following it with another slug of beer. Joey said, "You know, Neal, I saw your sister yesterday, over on Magazine. You know?" "Yeah," Neal replied, adding, "I knew she was back around. I haven't heard from her yet, though." "It was a hard break for her." "Yeah, hard break. Shit, why do you have to bring it all up again?" Neal didn't need this. He didn't want memories of Katie and Raynal swimming around in his head tonight. It already made him feel discombobulated or something. Distracted. Joey worked over at Tulane, groundskeeper or something. Once Katie had started classes, Joey would occasionally see her and let Neal know how she was doing. It had been nice to know she was okay and not be all in her face all the time. There'd been so much riding on her back. Her acceptance letter was even framed in her bedroom back home. Everyone was so proud that a girl from the channel, especially from their family, was going to be somebody. They all said so over and over again. Neal glanced at the clock in the shadows, near where the old payphone used to be. He stood up and made his way to the John. Two doors stood side by side at the end of a narrow hallway. It was a regular joke how, if both emptied out at once, you'd have to dance around each other to get past. He felt the small, rolled bundle in his side pocket as he entered the men's room. There were 2 stalls and 2 urinals on one wall and a couple of sinks. Neal unrolled an out-of-order sign he'd made from the rolled paper bag and taped it to the door of the far stall. He figured he'd down another pint fast so he'd have a reason to return once Raynal got there. He rolled the bag carefully around his remaining supplies, drained the lizard, zipped up, headed back to the bar. Raynal had already found a stool halfway down and was knocking back a shot of cognac as Neal walked past him. "Hey, Bacon!" "Yeah, how's it going, Raynal?" Neal took his seat and raised his pint, looking down the bar to where the big, loud asshole sat. His broad pink face glistened in the light glinting off the bottles in the back bar. "So what you doing all the way down there? Come on down, I got somebody I'd like you to meet." Neal slid down and took the stool next to Raynal. Raynal always needed an audience, and from the handbag on the bar under Raynal's elbow, Neal could see he'd brought one with him. Raynal stuck a shot glass out so Neal could clink it with his pint, like they were buds, right? Raynal went on about some recent achievement that was about to change his whole direction. Neal nodded, smiling while keeping his mind on other things. Raynal came from an old sugar family, lots of pride, money too. Must have been why the loudmouth had been so attractive to Katie, why she'd been drawn like a moth to a parking lot light. It hadn't helped that the Raynal's mansion was right up there near the school. He'd introduced her to dope and sex and then tossed her aside after the accident. Raynal had blamed the whole thing on Katie, and not just to the cops. He'd spread a line of bullshit around the whole campus and most of the town, too. He'd been behind the wheel, said Katie, but she was the one they hauled in. Neal needed to keep his temper under control. He also noticed that Raynal smelled faintly of seaweed. Must have been out on his daddy's boat. "So here she is now," Raynal's announcement accompanied a thin, studious-looking young woman with straight blonde hair to her shoulders, who just left the ladies' room. She smiled at Neal, revealing a retainer wire. Jailbait, Neal figured, offering, "Neal Bacon." He watched her smile flutter as his last name was uttered. "I'm Maddie Cole, Mr. Bacon," she replied in a Carolina drawl, sticking out her hand. Her fingers were cool and slightly damp. Neal grasped them lightly, then returned to his pint, while Raynal went on about how he'd met Miss Cole. Neal figured she was maybe 18, but 17 was more like it. Same age Katie had been. He called the barkeep for another pint. He hadn't figured on the girl or the extra set of eyes. He had to pull a little switcheroo with a couple of glasses. While Raynal rambled, Neal noticed how she focused upon his every word. He reached down into his jeans pocket and touched the screw cap on the little glass vial he'd brought back from that old Cajun witchee-woman. It fit within the knuckles of his curled middle finger. Okay, almost showtime. Neal slugged back the new pint and ordered another, Raynal noted, saying, "Just like a frog to water. Let me buy you a shot to go with that." No argument there. Neal remembered last week's conversation. "All right, son, but this stuff works really fast. I mean, maybe a couple of minutes is all the warning he's gonna get." "What's in it anyway?" "Oh, some cascara sagrada, some senna, some stuff of my own cooked up a long time. It's bitter, so make sure that it's in something with lots of flavor or he's gonna taste it. You got that?" "Yes'm." "You got that money too?" The vial contained a tea-colored tincture. Neal rolled it between his fingers beneath the bar while listening to the girl talk about her classes. Now he suggested something special. "Why don't I order something special for you and your girl? Something she had to come to NOLA for." The girl smiled excitedly as Raynal asked, "Now what'd y'all have in mind, Bacon?" "Well, since she's from out of town, I'd like to buy you both a Sazerac with real Peychaud's bitters." He leaned back to speak with the girl directly, saying, "It's the official drink of New Orleans." Raynal curled up his lip and said, "I thought the Hurricane was the official drink." "Not since Katrina. It's the Sazerac now. Besides, it's a better drink anyway. Not everyone knows how to pour it just right, you know? You know what all's in 'em?" "What is this, a quiz? Why don't you just order 'em while I head for the back room for just a minute, okay?" Raynal stood holding the edge of the bar, then steered toward the John. Neal whistled up the barkeep and asked for 3 Sazeracs. "You know, the real kind, with absinthe, you know?" "Well, I'll make 'em, but you gotta pay for 'em. Extra glasses and all." "No problem at all," replied Neal to the barkeep, then turned to the girl. He said, "Now watch the man work. It's really special." Her focus turned to the bar, where the barkeep was fiddling with bottles and glasses and ice. Neal quickly unscrewed the cap on the vial, then palmed it. "What's that he's doing now?" the girl asked, just as the barkeep flung excess absinthe into the sink after turning the glass slowly to coat it inside. "Now, watch how he chills off the rye." Neal hoped her attention would hold. After a few moments, the barkeep turned and with a flourish produced an old-fashioned glass 1/4 full of the whiskey drink. A peppery licorice smell drifted up from where he set it down on the bar in front of the girl. "The official drink of New Orleans, miss." Raynal's date actually clapped her hands. Neal smiled as she watched the next 2 drinks being mixed. Neal began to worry they wouldn't be ready before Raynal returned, but by the time Raynal swung the door open, Neal had both glasses sitting right in front of him. She'd got up to pick something on the jukebox. Neal carefully dumped the palm vial contents into one of the drinks. He heard a couple of quarters drop into the machine just as Reynolds came rolling back up to the bar. Sounds of an old Cajun tune began washing through the joint. Neal figured it for Dr. John. "Perfect choice," he announced as he presented the drink to Reynolds. "Just so we all know where we are," Neal lifted his glass in a toast and took a sip. Reynolds, in his usual boisterous way, knocked back both half the drink, then slapped the top of the bar with his hand. "Woo-wee! That's some kind of drink, isn't it, Miss Cole?" "Ooh," she replied, giggling. "It tastes like licorice and something else. It's good." "Yes, it is," said Reynolds as he knocked back the rest. "You're all right, Bacon." Neal smiled, sipped again, then announced he'd be right back. He got up and walked back to the John. This time, slipping into the out-of-order stall, he unrolled the paper package and withdrew another part in his plans, an extra large tube of crazy glue. He spread its contents out along the toilet seat's top surface. It was shiny black, and the light was dim. Just before leaving, he switched the out-of-order sign to the other stall, crossed his fingers. Back at the bar, Neal sipped his drink as Reynolds asked for a bottle of purple haze to chase the Sazerac. The combination made Neal shudder. The big man put on his usual show, but Neal saw him suddenly grimace. A few moments later, he grimaced again, and a low, rumbling roar sounded from under the bar in front of Reynolds. "Shit. Sorry." Reynolds rose from his stool and walked stiffly toward the door to the men's room. He put his hand upon the doorknob, then stepped back, nodding. Reynolds rocked and waited. The door opened, and an old guy from one of the dark tables emerged, dancing around Reynolds to get past. Reynolds stepped in, and the door closed. Maddie Cole was still telling Neal about one of her professors when Neal thought he heard someone shouting. He excused himself and headed toward the men's room. Sure enough, Reynolds was angrily calling out from inside the locked stall, "Help! I can't get up!" Neal walked quietly over to the closed stall door and removed the last rolled paper sign from his pocket. It read, "While you're sitting there, think twice before bad-mouthing a woman from the channel again, asshole." Neal flipped it over the stall door and pressed a line of tape on the top edge to hold it. Reynolds began to bellow, "You sumbitch, you shit, I'll get you!" Neal couldn't be seen from inside the stall, and though he was sorely tempted to reply, he kept his cool, wiping the smile off his face, thinking, Houston's gonna be just fine.
That was Bacon's Revenge, written and read by Richard Sutton.
The author of today's story couldn't come to our studio because he lives some distance away. Not in New Orleans, as you might guess, but in a distinctive enclave of New York, sometimes known as Long Island. So we have him on the phone line right now.
And my apologies in advance if the sound quality is compromised by the phone connection. Welcome, Richard.
Hey, it's my great pleasure to talk to you both today. I'm so glad I didn't have to cross those bridges.
Yeah.
Tolls add up, you know. Gotta love that VOIP.
Yeah. So, Richard, you and I have been sort of internet writing acquaintances for maybe a decade. And I've seen your author website, which has about 8 times as many books as I have. It seems most of your fiction deals with Irish history. So I'm wondering, why did you set this story in New Orleans?
Well, that's a very good question. It just so happened that I was on a reconnaissance mission down to NOLA with my wife many years ago when we discovered some buried family secrets surrounding the grandfather on her father's side that no one ever spoke about. A second-generation Irish-American merchant seaman from Brooklyn. After some sleuthing, we found an old address of his down in the 7th Ward, not too far from a naval yard that was active in the 30s and through the war. The whispers from living children of his suggested he disappeared and took up with another woman down there, so we wanted to find out. I mean, any excuse to take a walk near the foot of Canal Street, if you know what I mean.
Yeah.
Anyway, what we found out changed the family history completely. He had been part of a secret Navy U.S. Maritime Commission convoy made up of brand new 200-foot-long ocean-going tow tugs. They were built just upriver from NOLA at Avondale, and barges. And it turns out it was critical to supply an air base being built on Tinian Island in the South Pacific. And that air base later became the home of Enola Gay.
Oh, yeah.
And, anyway, he never made the return voyage completely, and he's buried down in Panama. But the whole thing felt kind of like a book.
Yeah.
You know? But the idea really got cemented into place when we ran into a couple of street musicians in the quarter on Royale. We got to talking, and it turned out they had just moved there from Red Hook, Brooklyn. They were history teachers in the public schools and spoke at length about all the connections between Red Hook and NOLA along the lines of Irish merchant seafaring families that often kept homes in both places.
Oh, yeah.
So we're thinking about that. When a guy comes out of the bar as we speak and he comes over to throw in, he asks us where we were from, and my wife, Vivian, replied with her usual humor, "Well, where do they call it a drink of water?" He said, "Either here in the Channel or from Brooklyn."
Yep.
So, what? So the story kind of reflects the need for the recent Irish immigrants to protect their communities by honing this rough and ready, reputation. It seemed kind of appropriate, and when the tale of the barstool retribution began circling around in my head again, it found a new home and became a story.
Yeah.
So we've been back many times, and I've enjoyed lots of drinks and pints in the bar the story was set in, right on Magazine Street. The book itself has been a 6-year labor of love so far. I'm about 3/4 of the way through. But I'm thinking I might need to nail down some more local facts, don't you?
Yes, sir. Another visit. Right. I walked the full length of Magazine Street once, long ago, and I've walked up and down Royal more times than I can count. But it's an interesting coincidence that I'm currently reading A Confederacy of Dunces, which is famous for its New Orleans speech. And also, one of the preface pages points out the same thing you just said, how the dialects of New Orleans and various parts of the New York City area share a common source.
So it seems the whole world grew out of Brooklyn at one time or another.
Yeah, maybe. But culturally, New Orleans is a very unusual place, at least for an American city, a place with its own brand of magic, as in the Cajun witchee-woman in your story. So what else can you tell us about her?
I'm going to probably have to, next trip down, go and visit Marie Laveau's grave in Iberville No. 2 Cemetery at the St. Louis Church off Tremé.
Oh, yeah. I've been there.
Of course, the word has it that she's still hanging around outside her tomb. Folks of all kinds still leave requests and different forms of payment for favors granted. Even the historians think she may have been one of the most powerful politically connected women in the entire South at one time.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm no one to scoff at the idea of magic either. In and near New Orleans, near the city, we found that practitioners of folk cures and healing, both from Cajun and Creole cultures, are still plying their trades.
Yeah.
You see occasional signs hanging on trees. They might not hang a regular shingle up, but most of the older folks in the neighborhood know who to go to see if you need something special.
Yep.
Yeah, I was there once, for a week or so on a film job. I was walking late one night after having drank a little too much. It Without realizing it, I'd wandered out of the quarter and found myself in a desolate, run-down neighborhood. It felt threatening. There was no one around, and I was lost. I was getting apprehensive, and then I saw an old guy walking towards me on the sidewalk. As we passed, I stumbled on an uneven stone. He glanced sideways at me and said, "Watch your step, Tom." All my hair stood on end, and I felt a shiver down my spine. How did he know my name? The next day, I told the story to the guy I was working with, who was from the area. He laughed and told me that the use of the name Tom is like Bud or Pal, so the mystery evaporated.
Ha! Good story. Well, I've been to New Orleans many times, but for very quick trips, never really settling in. For me, the city itself is a challenge to conventional reality. I mean, to quote Tennessee Williams, America has only 3 cities: New York, San Francisco, and New Orleans. Everywhere else is Cleveland. So I think a lot of people's reality is basically Cleveland.
What, a suburb with beige houses, clean sidewalks, manicured lawns?
Oh, you mean like Long Island? I haven't manicured anything on my property in years.
Oh, good.
But back to the story. The topic of revenge. It's a universal theme in literature.
Like The Count of Monte Cristo, Hamlet, Stephen King's Carrie. Is that literature?
Oh, yeah.
So what drew you to that subject? Or, to go deeper, where does the revenge compulsion come from?
Well, there's a childhood fantasy buried inside me that I suppose comes from having moved around every single year I was growing up. So I was always the new kid and kind of the target of pranks of all kinds. The thing is, we'd pick up and leave before I ever got the chance to settle the score. Now, I've always been drawn to particularly appropriate and creative means of getting even. So when I hear a good twisted tale of retribution, it kind of sticks in the muse locker for later use.
Yeah, okay. Now, I saw Neal Bacon's family protectiveness and pride in your story, and the actions he takes as almost a form of tribal warfare, a male thing.
Yeah.
I mean, his sister never asked him to take revenge, right?
Oh, absolutely. And it's a very deep part of Irish culture here and all the way back to the old sod. It's the chieftain's duty to protect his people, even when it means getting in way over his head. I wrote a recent story around such an ancient tale of 2 clans brandishing weapons across the width of a creek after one tried to steal a cow from the other. There's genuine relish in conflict within the ancient culture, at least. And I recall that writer G.K. Chesterton, who described the Irish in his Ballad of the White Horse as, quote, "The men that God made mad, for all their wars are merry, and all their songs are sad."
That's good. So in your story, it seems also a type of class warfare, if we might infer an additional motive, maybe a subconscious one. Reynal is rich. Neal's the working man who resents him.
Not so subconscious. Thinking who you are is a particularly bad kind of behavior among the neighborhood folks in Brooklyn, and I suspect in NOLA too. Lots of resentment for those who try to rise above their kin and show it off, lord it around over everyone. It's a phrase I learned when I first came to New York.
So what would you say about the morality of a poisoner? Someone who takes it on himself to mete out punishment?
That's another good question. The answer in this particular case falls between the extremes of complete justification and poor judgment. I don't think that Neal would have used such drastic measures to get even unless the slight had been, as it was in this case, against a family member then flaunted about town.
Yeah.
Maybe Neal will have to pay later, or maybe he won't. Humor wielded as a weapon is also somehow deeply Irish.
Yes, indeed. You know, I often wonder, why do people get upset when others break the rules and feel the need to react? Is it because in order to maintain civilization, our individual desires have to be compromised with those of others? So to flout that is in effect to undermine the group effort at survival? Something deeply rooted in our evolution?
Well, I think there are many things that were hardwired into our behavior tens of thousands of years ago. Going back to our struggle to find homes in new lands, among others who probably weren't all that friendly. In those ancient times, it had to be our tribe, our clan first. Prescribed behavior kind of grew out of what was of benefit to all, long before the idea of individual achievement came along. The community, seems to need to be settled before it can take the time to create art or songs and sit and tell stories around the fire.
Yeah.
So breaking rules established in struggle like that can be seen as the equivalent of turning your back on your people. Loyalty and trust are probably the attributes most respected.
Yeah, well, this has been a good discussion. So, Richard, do you have any new work in progress, or how do you spend your days?
Well, sad to say, my creative writing has been pretty much blocked since January of 2017, Inauguration Day.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. But besides river traffic, which is the tentative name of my NOLA tale, I've also got a sequel to an ancient travelogue through Gaul that I released a couple of years back, The Gift, that I'm still, I've got ideas revolving around in my brain. But every time I try to return to these since January 2017, I've found my usual very engaging muse has completely fled the scene, leaving me to try to figure it all out on my own. Yeah. Now that the midterms are over, I'm hoping my poor stressed brain will recover enough to get on with my writing. But in the meantime, I always have home repairs, cats to wrangle, ponds to paddle, guitars to pick.
Yeah.
Yeah. And keeping ahead of the doctors can keep you on your toes, too. I also still ply the design craft for a select group of clients doing book covers and marketing graphics and things like that. So that gives me some creative outlet.
Yeah, sometimes I think, considering how much exposure some of us get for our writing, that maybe just imagining the work is just as valid as actually doing it. The quality is certainly higher, at least for me. But then I say to myself, nah, it's fun to sit down at the keyboard and bleed.
Well, I write on my phone. Very small keyboard, a lot less pain. Though what it does to your mind is something else. Thanks for joining us, Richard.
No, thank you both. It's been a lot of fun, and thinking about my work may actually serve to help get me back to it.
This is The Strange Recital, on the web at thestrangerecital.com. The music on this episode was Tansen by Keelabot and Sensual Melancholia by Loyalty Freak Music. This is episode 18112. I'll take bacon and egg on a hard roll with Swiss cheese if you're going out. Thanks.